Literary Roadhouse, one short story a week. I'm Beth.
I'm Andy.
And I'm Anais. And this week we are joined by Beth Mayer. She is the author of We Will Tell You Otherwise, her debut short story collection that won the 2017 Hudson Prize with Black Lawrence Press, who is also her publisher. The book just debuted and is a Midwest Connections pick for August. Her fiction has appeared in the Threepenny Review, the Sun Magazine, and the Midway Review. She was a fiction finalist for the Missouri Review's Jeffrey E. Smith's Editor Prize in 2016. Beth holds an MFA in creative writing from Hamline University. She currently teaches English at Century College in Minnesota, where she lives with her family and an impossibly faithful dog. Visit her online at bethmayer.com. A link is provided in the show notes. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And also the show notes will be all of her social media links, so you can go follow her, tweet with her, everything you want to do.
Great.
So Beth, why do you write short stories?
Well, I fell in love with the form as a young reader, even as a kid grabbing books at the Helen Plum Memorial Library in Lombard, Illinois. I would grab short stories. I read Lois Lowry short stories. I read short stories that were too old for me to be reading, but no one was vetting my selections, which is like really good. I think that's like an excellent approach to raising children. Is let them read whatever they want. And so I really always loved the form. And then when I started getting serious about my own writing, I fell in love with even a deeper level. I know that folks aren't always running out to buy short story collections, although there are some exceptions to that. Diaz, Alice Munro, of course, more recent folks like Justin Torres and Leslie Arima. So I read short story collections all the time. I love them so much. And so as a writer, I found that right now anyway, or more recently, to engage with that form as a writer, I was permitted to kind of go into that universe for a month, couple weeks. And because I have been simultaneously living a life as a mom and as a teacher, and as a person with a partner who likes to see me occasionally, I didn't feel thus far in my life like I could dive into the universe of a novel, which I think will be a 2-year process where everything will be filtered through that lens of the novel I'm writing, whereas a short story is a shorter duration to live in that world or that universe. But as a reader, when they work, it's like perfection. And so I love reading short stories. So this is a wonderful venue for discussing them. So I love that you're doing this.
Yeah. I think we'd agree that when a short story just really gets it right, it just feels genius. Sometimes I'll read a novel where I'm just like, that was a good novel. It would have been so much more powerful in a short story. It took too long to get me to the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what? I have had that experience too. And there have been times where I've been reading like a really, an accomplished novel with a really strong voice. And I think there were a lot of detours, and not necessarily like a B line story, like a B plot or a C plot, but boy, we just spent a lot of time just kind of eating supper and hanging out. And, I don't feel like I wasted my time if I like the company of the characters and the voice of the narrator and it's an accomplished writer. But and somebody once said, and I wish I knew who it was, someone's going to Google it, which is great. Basically, like if you can tell it in a poem, if you can do it in a poem, do it in a poem. If you can do it in a short story, do it in a short story. If it needs a novel, write the novel. Sort of like let the thing dictate the form. And I've had that experience with novels too.
Yeah. And Andy, so you've been reading more short stories a little bit because of this podcast, right? Because you were almost all novels.
I don't want to give you credit for that, Anais.
Don't give me credit, but you resisted literary short stories.
I resisted literary short stories.
Literary part.
I'm all over like short horror fiction. Like that's, I like especially horror works really nice as a short story, because then you don't have to do all this other stuff. You just be like, a thing happens. Scared you. Okay.
Yeah, I also feel like mystery thrillers. When I read a novel that I think to myself, this would work better as a short story, it's almost always a mystery type thing where it's just like, there was a lot of just like, and then I was at work. Okay. Okay.
Really slow reveals, overly slow reveals. Yeah.
Yeah.
Andy, I'll just interject. I'm kind of with you because I love, say, Joyce Carol Oates, and I even love, oh my gosh, the name is escaping me, but they just made a big Netflix movie out of Haunting of Hill House. Who's the writer?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, but it's going to come to me, and she was that writer whose name is going to come to me any minute. Shirley Jackson.
Oh yes, we read
Shirley Jackson.
Yeah.
Well, okay, Andy, deep dive. Shirley Jackson. You're going to be busy for a while, and you'll have new respect for. She's underappreciated in that way, I think. But yeah, some contemporary sci-fi and even cli-fi sort of has a horror kind of a melding thing going on, which I find very interesting. And I had a nice conversation with my colleague Sam Borman about how we label something as literary, and I don't discourage that as a misnomer here, but things can be literary that the ivory tower hasn't deemed literary, right? And so it's sort of in the eye of the beholder, and things can not be literary, in my opinion, that somebody deemed literary. So I like how genres are getting mashed up, and those distinctions are becoming rightfully less defined, I think.
Yeah, because we've definitely tried to read some horror, some sci-fi, some fantasy on this show. You said cli-fi? I've never heard that before. What's that?
Well, I did not make that up. I find it interesting, and so it's the idea, and I'm reading Octavia Butler right now, which I'm reading her novels, but like N.K. Jemisin, which is one of the stories that I recommended, she's writing cli-fi. Octavia Butler wrote cli-fi before we knew what cli-fi was. So climate related.
Oh, okay. I wonder what the cli part was. Climate.
Yeah, cli-fi. So it's climate related. Often someone might call it science fiction, but is it really, or is it just prophetic? I don't know. So it's scary, I'll tell you that.
Didn't we used to call that speculative fiction? Wouldn't that fall under that umbrella back in the day?
Absolutely. And I haven't done away with using that term speculative fiction. To me, cli-fi, sci-fi, fantasy would all fall under speculative fiction. I think of that as like a nice, less kind of definitive way, and that way, and even some stuff that's sort of magical realism. Some people, I mean, we're seeing mashups with lots of genres, like Leslie Arima's short story collection. Beautiful, gorgeous. Be fun if we could find one of her pieces that is readily accessible, because she is gorgeous. Oh, you've read her actually on the show.
Yes,
I found her. Yeah.
So, we read oh my god, the one with the dolls. Who will greet you at home?
Oh my gosh.
So good.
There you go.
So
I know.
Good. It's one of my
and what is it?
Yeah, I don't know.
Where does that fall? Right? It's sort of like is it a parable? Is it a contemporary is it contemporary folklore? Is it magic? Is it horror?
It's like so calling it magical realist almost doesn't seem right.
No.
Because no, I don't know. I have no idea what it is, but it's been.
Yeah. Right. And I love that she just wrote it and didn't like take out elements that like, well, this isn't literary fiction, or well, this isn't really magical realism. She just wrote it, and we can figure it out what it is. That's up to, we can write papers about it. So there we go.
And the truth is, for most readers, you're not even worried about what genre it is. What you're really trying to get at is what are the themes that are being explored.
Right.
Which in that story in particular, it just seemed like there was a lot of themes about sort of motherhood, womanhood that were just so beautifully drawn without beating you over the head, which is like lovely.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love that we're circling back to that story. So it's sort of like an Easter egg for your faithful listeners, right? Yes. They can go back and be like, oh, I read that one too. I know what they're talking about. So and I think, it's nice. In theory, it's nice to say that readers aren't worried about what genre it is. And I think that's true, but booksellers are.
Oh, yeah, they are.
Pressured too.
Yes.
And that is concerning to me sometimes because publishers and booksellers get kind of forced into, well, what is this? Where does this fit? So
yeah, and I think
interesting.
It is. And I think it's also because while readers are not concerned in the moment that they're reading something they're enjoying, when they're looking something new to buy, that categorization helps get them in the right aisle.
Yep.
So it's like But like I said, I think readers are really concerned about like what they're getting out of the story, those themes. So what themes do you find yourself exploring in your work?
Well, I'm attracted to stories. I'm compelled by stories that are circling around my current personal obsessions, which is what I'm writing about. So definitely similar to Leslie Arima, I would be so bold just to say in that story, the ideas of motherhood and what it costs, and the longing that one might feel to love something unconditionally and have that something, whatever that something is, love you back. Certainly, the story that we're going to discuss today, Celeste Ng's Girls at Play, which is a kind of a brutal story. I am interested in where we find hope. I'm interested in sort of the classic loss of innocence, of childhood. Definitely interested in women, young women, growing women, learning how to advocate for themselves and be truth tellers in the world. Those are some pretty vital themes for me.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up the story because we should get to discussing it. But before we do, real quick, so who are your favorite short story authors?
Oh gosh, well, I sort of rattled a few of them off. So Alice Munro is sort of my my model of a master short story writer. I look to her a lot. I reread her. I sort of study on her. I go back even to Flannery O'Connor, which I think, it's been overly anthologized and probably overly taught. And so for some that may feel tired, but there's lots of stories that haven't been anthologized that would feel like coming across something. Where has this been all my life? So for folks that would be interested, dig back into her. And then her writing about writing is very instructive to me and sort of motivational to me as a woman, as a writer, as someone who I sometimes lead a quieter life and by choice and by necessity. And she certainly did that even to the point of reclusiveness because she was ill and she died young, never married, didn't have children. And that's not my lived experience, but her a collection of letters and essays called Mystery and Manners by Flannery O'Connor sits on my bookshelf, and it's gorgeous. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And then more contemporary writers, I like Bonnie Jo Campbell a lot. I like Justin Torres, We the Animals. I found some similarities between that, which has also been made into a film, and our story for today. Yeah, those are the ones that strike me right now.
Nice. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm excited to get to today's story because brutal is a great way to describe it.
Yes.
So
yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. I love brutal. I love brutal.
All right.
Yeah, Andy.
How you doing, Andy? It's kind of brutal.
Yeah.
When Andy has the floor, we'll see.
So
Okay.
how about this story, right? It starts off right in it, which I appreciated, to let us know what part of the tone was going to be, right? So it's these three girls. They're in 8th grade, Angie, Carrie, and Mandy at Lakeview Heights Junior High. They play this game at recess where the little boys come by and snap a colored bracelet off their wrist. And then that means they go and do whatever sexual thing that color-coded bracelet meant. And nobody ever talks about it or references it outside of that. So that's pretty a thing. And then they just do this because they're the poorer girls. They don't get along with the other kids as much, and then this is their thing. This is their thing, and they all stuck together, and that's what they do. And then they meet this new girl, Grace, who's a year younger than them. She's an army brat. She doesn't have any friends. They start hanging out with Grace, and Grace is into younger kids stuff, and they start doing that, and they're all into it, and they start kind of reclaiming their childhood. And then Grace starts trying to be more adult, and that's a great source of friction between them. And then Grace wants to play the game, and then so
poor Andy, you seem really distraught.
That's so rough. Are you kidding me? And then like I knew it was going to be dark. That's the thing. I knew it was going to be dark. The whole time they're wearing the same bracelets. They keep the bracelets on from the moment they see Grace. They never take the bracelets off. The story references them a couple times. It's like, oh yeah, they're playing dress up. Hey, remember they got those bracelets on though. Like, don't forget about that. That's going to come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're not done with that.
Then they shove Grace down and throw all the bracelets onto her and leave her alone at the flagpole for all of the hungry jackal boys to come and man.
I know.
So and then that's how and then the girls leave and don't look to see what Grace does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't have a theory about that, but we'll get into it.
Please, yeah. Is it a nice theory about how nice it is?
No, it's not a nice theory. It's a bad theory. It's a terrible theory. It's a theory that they definitely know.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we know that Andy is scarred and his soul has been ruined.
Yeah. I'm really sorry to do that to you.
Andy's very sensitive.
Well, good. I like you even more now. Yeah. Well, so I don't know if your listeners know that as a guest, I picked the story, so guilty as charged. I picked the story, and I'm glad that it punched you in the gut. It should.
Yeah, that's what
right?
It's designed for.
It should. Yeah. My students and even my family sometimes are, why don't you ever read anything happy? And I'm not like a emo person. I'm not walking around, I have a positive outlook on life, but I also, this idea of do not avert your gaze, and I felt like this story was so timely. Just unfortunately, very, very timely. And there is something interesting about that, which is this conversation that's happening about consent.
Yeah.
And kids now are starting to have conversations about consent in ways, and celebrities are having conversations about consent. And if they're not having conversations about consent, then their people are not doing right by them. So parents are having conversations about consent with their kids, teachers, etc. I'm not oversimplifying it. This story is universal, I think.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and honestly, it is universal. And it's not old. It's not like, well, this was true in the 90s. This is just an old story. This isn't contemporary, because it's contemporary too.
Yeah. And the boldness of making them so young. If they were 16 or 17-year-old girls, it's still bad, but it hits you in a different way. Like, Anyway, so Andy, despite it just, upsetting you, but did you like it?
Well, okay, I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy reading it. Yeah, it was very good at storying.
Yeah, right.
So let's jump into the discussion. I loved it from that craft boldness perspective. Like, thank you for writing this story that made me feel terrible.
Yeah.
But right out the gate, I want to talk about the point of view, because that was super interesting. Like, okay, Andy just jumped. Go, Andy.
Andy's raising his hand.
Who's the narrator? It's the collective three girls, right? It's the all of us, but not any one of us, and it's that, I guess, distancing from, like, then you can't quite pin it on, like, you can't pin the consequences on any particular person.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, who did this? We did.
Right. But despite that, it seems very clear to me that it's definitely one of them, right? When three people are actually telling a story, you contradict each other. They're like, no, it didn't happen like that. Well, actually, that's not happening. It's not actually three voices. It's one voice who is purposefully, intentionally trying to share that blame with other people without revealing who they are telling the story, which I thought was so good.
Yeah.
So good. Like, it's one of you. We don't know who. And this we serves you in maybe a tiny bit alleviating your guilt.
Absolutely.
So good.
Yeah, I find that collective voice really interesting, and I've been experimenting with that in my own fiction. One of my dear friends, she's writing her whole novel in process in this collective voice, and it's really challenging. It's really a bold move as a writer. I can't imagine all the questions and nuances that that Ng needed to wrestle with as she perfected this story. And then, there is a tradition of that collective voice when it's a mob, right? So you kind of go back through your archives, and you'll see that collective voice used when the narrator. I absolutely agree with you, Anais, that they're pushing the blame away. They're wanting to share the blame. So yeah, I find that very interesting. So I've been experimenting with collective voice in my own writing as well, and it's a challenge. It's hard to do it well.
Yeah, and I think Celeste Ng really pulls it off. And one thing, in case she never explains why the girls force all their bracelets on Grace in that moment. Does anyone want to tackle why they do it?
I kind of want to hear what you think.
Yeah.
unless you want to chime in on that.
I mean, I feel like my guess is just that they felt betrayed. They were trying to go the one direction, and she forced them to acknowledge everything else.
I think that's part of it. And I think also it's because they're so young. They don't know how to deal with that frustration. Like you said, she's forcing them to sort of like admit to this game that they don't want to admit to, because with Grace, it was weird. With Grace, they could both be the child and the mother. They love the ability to nurture her and guide her as a child. And then whenever she's like, I want to shoplift too, I want to wear makeup, that really rubbed them the wrong way. She's forcing them to look at this, but also there's that childish sort of tantrum, like, okay, then here, have it all. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like the little kid who like wants your French fries, so you shove the whole thing in his face because he annoyed you. Like that kind of thing that only kids do. It was such a good way to remind you, these are 13-year-old girls. They're going to live with this guilt for the rest of their lives. But the choice that they made is so typical of the age, which is what's so brutal about it. It's so brutal.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that question per se, but I think your read on it seems spot on to me. And, that act in and of itself was also violent. That felt like an attack and abusive, to hold somebody down and to force something upon them. And so that was sort of a precursor, right, to the acts that they know she has in store for her. And I found the ending very interesting, and I'm kind of hoping we can chat more about that, like that choice that Ng made, the sort of speculation, maybe this happened, maybe that happened, kind of, we're done. We've washed our hands of you. Okay, you want to be in our club? You're in the club. Good luck to you.
And I like your comment about it being violent, because the way that Ng writes it, she's like zooming in on how it's like scraping against her knuckles and reddening them. Like, she's not, the way that the prose is written, the images she's carving in your mind is like an assault. Everyone's pinning her down. They're shoving her on the ground. Right. Because you could very easily just write, they just sort of shove it all on there in a sentence or two. But she devoted a little bit more time to let you know, like, the violence starts here.
Yeah. That's astute observation. Yeah. This story builds. I found it interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that, Andy, that we never lost sight of those bracelets and where they were, and that they were just sort of like, the loaded gun on the table in the first act, that they were going to come back for sure. And they sure did.
Yeah. So let's talk about that ending. So Beth, you were saying the sort of speculative, like, did she not leave the flagpole, or did she just shut it down and refuse, or was she sort of forced to do all of these things? So do you have a theory as to what happened? Or do you think it's really open?
Well, I don't think it's open.
Yeah, me neither.
I think we know I think we know, we're not kidding ourselves. They're not kidding themselves either. I've got, because I am an analog person, I printed this out. I will recycle this paper. And there's a line, third paragraph from the bottom. We turn away then and close our eyes, so we never know if Grace follows them to the bleachers or not. And then it's maybe she pushes them away. Maybe she holds them off with her eyes. Maybe she never leaves the flagpole. Maybe she follows them after all, not understanding what's to come. Or maybe, and this is why we close our eyes, maybe she follows them with her head up, eyes trained on the horizon, like the day we taught her to steal. And so that's not the last line, but it could have been the last line, to be honest with you, because then the fear is we're complicit. I mean, obviously they're complicit in that they invited her into the game, right? They gave her the tools, or the blessing, if you will, not a blessing, but then, does she have a choice? Does she make the choice? Is it a conscious choice? Is it because of us? Is kind of how I read it. And I found this universal theme here is that, this story is about this indoctrination. It's an indoctrination story. And girls in 8th grade are indoctrinated by rape culture. And if they're lucky, they have some mentors and some guides and some adults or older girls or someone who can say, hold up, what do you want to do? But this story, this big theme is this complicit, and they averted their eyes. We did not look. We averted our eyes.
Yeah, but they know what happened.
Oh yeah.
Even if they won't admit it, because either it happens and everyone's talking about it at school, whether or not Grace shows up the next day. And if Grace doesn't show up the next day and never returns to the school because of what happened to her, she gets pulled out. That's your answer too. So they know. And the fact that they can't say it in this confession is just a brilliant choice. Yeah, Andy?
Well, just to be clear, what we're talking about is how Grace then just goes back to class and has a lovely day, right? That's
okay, Andy. Just
poor Andy.
We'll put you back in your little bubble. Yeah, I know. It's tough. It's harsh. It's harsh.
I wonder if there's like a gender thing here, because Gerald's not here today. He's at a writing retreat, probably loving that he's at a writing retreat, because Gerald really struggles with stories that have violence against women, especially sexual violence against women, and he does not cope. And there's a part of me that wonders, like, maybe the sample size is too small, but I wonder if women having to live with the constant threat of that or the event of that in their lives can like look at this story with their eyes wide open, and men who don't have to live with that as much are like, oh my God, the pain, the brutality. Because Gerald also he struggles with these stories as well.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting about this.
What do you think, Andy?
Is okay. If the scene about Grace being assaulted had been when she went behind the bleachers with the boys, that would not have been an interest. Like, the boys are, feral wild animals. Mm-hmm. That's not to excuse the boys.
No.
But we know that story already. We're like, okay, there's a pack of monsters. They're shaped like 14-year-old boys. Mm-hmm. But in the story, they're not human characters. They're this thing that's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good observation, especially because she devotes no time. Ng devotes no time in making the boys individuals. None of them have names. They always move as a pack. So they're always the collective noun. So they're just the monster, which is interesting because I'm sure there's plenty of boys in the school who don't do this, just like there's plenty of girls in the school who don't do this. But the ones that do are so vicious. And their targets are pretty much anyone. And pretty much anyone who's been told to expect that, which is what I think the bracelets represent, the indoctrination point that Beth was making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. I know, right?
Okay, so I have Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng is gorgeous, and the ending is hopeful. So Andy, it's a novel. You can enjoy her beautiful, accomplished prose. There are girls who are threatened, and there is some victory for them. Good. Well, I shouldn't relieve that. I shouldn't say the ending. But I will say there is some hope. There's a hopeful ending. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not a super clear ending, but it's hopeful.
Yeah. I'm choosing soon the next 6 books in the book club, so maybe I'll add that one.
Please do. Yes. It's a winner.
Yeah. So in this discussion, we have focused a lot on Grace, what happens to Grace, but let's just focus on the 3 girls, Angie, Carrie, Mandy, because just the fact that these 13-year-old girls are playing this game is shocking in and of itself, even without Grace, even without the story of Grace. So how did you guys, Andy, just in the way that you were giving the summary, I would say poorly, can you can you describe for us your reaction to the game that the girls were playing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. It was rough, but at least they were making decisions they should not have had to make or be making at that age. But no, of course not. You can't decide anything when you're 13. It's nothing you do as a choice, but at least they felt some level of agency in it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sort of. They never got to choose. And you'll notice all of the acts were pleasing to the man. None of them were like, oh, and now he goes down on you. There was none of that. All of it was in service to the guy, to the boy, which stood out at me from the beginning. I was just like, wow, this is not a two. At first, okay, I'm not going to lie. When I first read the colors before I got to the bracelet and before I read Black All the Way, I was like, oh, it's like a game of Spin the Bottle with a color wheel.
Yeah, it started.
Right? Yeah. And the thing with Spin the Bottle is the I don't know if it's real or not, but the pretense of it is that both sides want to do this. And the kiss is the fun part, right? Like, it's supposed to be like, oh, both the boys and girls are exploring a little bit of their sexuality, almost never to spin the bottle, go to all the way, right? But, you know, there might be a tongue, no tongue type of thing. But what becomes very clear with this bracelet game, especially when she describes exactly what it is this isn't actually a two-way exploration. It's like the girls are acting out because they're feeling, like you said, they're from the wrong side of the track, so to speak. The poor girls in this area. All the other girls have like violins and ballet recitals, and they don't. And it's this way of just like acting out. It's kind of like, I don't know exactly how the saying goes, but it's like that old notion of like, if you treat someone like an animal, they'll act like an animal. Like that's the kind of like version of the rebellion that they're doing. So yeah, it's like, if you treat them like they're the bad girls, then they can either try to constantly prove you wrong or rebel by being that to the nth degree. And I feel like that's what's happening here. But they don't get to choose the colors. They don't get to choose the boys. They have to go to the bleachers and do it. They can't tell anyone about it. Like it's very, rapey, and any illusion that they have that they consented to it is just not really, I don't believe it, right? They're just too young.
Yep.
Yeah. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is awfully timely, much to the chagrin of many public figures, I would imagine. And I am sorry to say, like, this seems completely plausible to me. Like 100% plausible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because I think, again, to Ng's credit, she spent a little bit of time saying, this is the kind of thing that's not supposed to happen here. Maybe it's supposed to happen in Cleveland Heights, where people are poor, but not here. And if you make it like a school-wide game, it starts to not feel plausible anymore. Like, you can't believe every single kid is in on this at a school. But when you make it just three of the girls who are shunned by the rest of the girls, now it feels very plausible. Yeah. And just taking that time to draw those lines where, like, this is supposed to be the wealthier, good districts, but look what happens when these kids who are not wealthy and are being shunned by everybody else because of class, look what happens to them. Now it feels very plausible in a horrible, heartbreaking way. Ng's just very, very smart and exactly what she needs to tell you, like, without ever beating you over the head.
Absolutely. And this, to me, this short story, absolutely, like, she could have stretched this out into a novel. Absolutely could have stretched this out into a novel, but it's so effective as a short story. It's so inescapable, and then the arc is so tight, that like it takes your breath away, right? Like to me, sometimes a beautiful, heart-wrenching short story, whatever genre, can just, I call it a punch in the gut. It's not like, oh, I just love a good punch in the gut, but I love a short story that is this effective and this truer truth, right? That fiction can aspire to be. That we tell a story to tell a truer truth, and this just feels like it encapsulated that girl world, that brutal girl world that is there. Yeah. I
don't know if I've ever said it on the show before, but that's what I frequently think is a good short story picks an emotion and then punches you in it.
Yeah. Like it or not.
Right.
You're gonna get it. Yeah.
and a lot of stories that dwell on loss of innocence in teenage girls tend to pick girls that it's almost like you spend a lot of time showing how innocent they are. And then when the innocence is broken, you either need to make it feel inevitable that they made that choice, or it happened to them and it's violent on some level. What's interesting about this is she doesn't spend any time proving to you that these girls are innocent. And she doesn't take the time to make anything feel inevitable. She's right out the gate with the bracelets in the game, which is so bold because like in a very judgmental culture where women are either the Madonnas or the whores, right?
Yeah.
You're risking having some very prudish, judgmental readers say, well, they got what was coming to them because they're little baby hoes. Like,
Yep.
Which again might be why making them 13 is smart as well. Because if they're a little bit older, you're too quick to dismiss them as hoes. But when they're 13, you're like, wait a minute. Like,
yeah.
Yeah,
they just got out of Girl Scouts if they were in girls, it's like, and I'm sure some readers would respond in that way. Right. And I wouldn't want to be on that podcast, but, but with you all who are looking at this and really wrestling with it, that's what it's meant to do. Just gorgeous prose, just inescapable.
Yeah.
It's
so good.
So good.
Yeah. Is it
bad?
So bad, but so good. So smart. Just so smart. Yeah.
So smart.
Yeah. And the prose was just so effective at just drawing, like the thing that I kept noticing when I would put on my analytical brain. So one of the things in the show we talk about is like, I have the reader brain where I'm just enjoying what I'm reading. And then like, okay, I have to discuss this in a podcast brain. And the thing that I just kept noticing is how from one sentence to the next, she is expertly drawing your attention to the exact thing that it needs to be drawn to in that moment. Which not all writers have necessarily that command. That's when you get a bit of the more meandering or like, like she never, and nothing ever felt gratuitous. It was so good. And if you were saying maybe this could be a novel, I feel like a novel would have been too brutal. Could you imagine? You have to spend more time with the game. You have to spend more time with Grace's fall from grace. Like, I
love that. Grace's fall from grace. No, you're right. I think that, I could weave a scenario where this might be a novel, but I think we'd have to go back. Like this would probably be the start. And then we'd go back and we'd learn about their loss of innocence. And maybe we'd hear from each girl. I don't know. But the universe of this girl world and the arc of the story, I think could be expanded, but I'm glad it's not. And there, I have read novels where I just like, I gotta skip a chapter. I can't be in this uncomfortable place. I don't need these many details, and I'm really glad, like if this story was titillating at all, I'd be like, no, do not, don't do that. Don't use that. Right. Don't go there. And this is a subject matter that I explore myself as a writer, and a book that is really tough to read, but really powerful to read if this subject matter is something you dare to spend time with, is the book Lolita, which don't think about the film, because the film is titillating, and I think that's wrong. It's broken. It's not what Nabokov had in mind when he wrote Lolita. The spark for him for Lolita is just crazy interesting. I don't know if we have time, but I could tell you if you want to know.
Tell us.
Okay, the spark for Nabokov writing the book Lolita has nothing to do with a young girl. He saw a really intelligent chimpanzee or gorilla in a cage, and he looked in that animal's eyes and saw how trapped that animal was, and just like had like an I thou experience, like a sentient being to sentient being experience with this primate. And that's when he wrote Lolita. So it's not about
lusting after
precocious teens who want to be with an older man. It's not. It's about being trapped. And so the film didn't do that right. I can't watch the film. I don't want to watch the film. But this is material that I seem to circle around sometimes. And if I could do it like Celeste Ng, I'd be so happy. So hats off, right, to that accomplished writing that we get to enjoy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else we want to add? That was awesome. That insight into the Spark for Lolita. Before we do the game and the ratings. So, the ratings where we go from 1 to 6. It's kind of like silly. This is like from episode like 1 or something. It's just like that final cap. And the reason it's 1 to 6, which is weird, is because Ray Bradbury wrote over 600 short stories. We're like, all right, we're just like, yeah. And it's sort of turned into 5 means it's very good. And anything above 5 is like, I'm screaming from the rooftops. Everybody needs to read this story. And we do half points. Yeah.
Okay. Who goes first? I don't know how this works.
Whoever wants to go first. I mean, I'm going to go first with a 6 then, because everyone should read the story. Required reading.
I think it's a 6 too.
Oh man.
Andy's going to bring our average down.
Yeah, I mean,
it's okay. We get it. Yeah.
It's a 5 for sure. But like, isn't there? Okay, what if we lived in a world where this wasn't important to know?
But we don't live in that world, so.
What if we did?
I'm sorry. I would really like that. Let's keep doing that work, right?
Let's keep doing that work, but part of that work is the story, so.
Yeah.
Part of that work is the story and being uncomfortable, being really, really uncomfortable. Because the story is so spot on.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad I read it and I don't want to read it again.
Yeah.
So.
If you ever have a daughter.
I'm gonna not
forbid her from buying gel bracelets. No color-coded anything.
No. Never. What are those bracelets? What are those bracelets? Yeah.
Did you talk to a boy today?
Like, don't do that. That's
they're
really
bad. They're all bad. No.
But apparently you can't even talk to girls because then they'll shove bracelets on you.
True.
I know. So I'm a parent. I don't know. Are either of you parents?
No, my 14-year-old just started his first day of high school tomorrow. Just started.
Okay.
Tomorrow.
I have a son and a daughter. And more and more we have really candid conversations as they've gotten older. Yeah.
I feel like Brandon, Andy's son, he's too much into games and boy stuff still, so.
Yeah, that's my hope. And
he seems disinterested currently in all of that, but he won't always be.
And you're not raising a jackal. You're not raising a jackal. You're paying attention. And you're not raising an entitled, privileged, oblivious jackal. I just being on this podcast with you, I know you are not raising that person. No,
he's a very sweet
I appreciate
kid.
that.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. And you still have to talk to him about consent.
Yep.
And it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Maybe I'll make him read this.
Or you know what? If you want to like give him something, there's the drinking tea analogy that you can show him.
I'm familiar. That's a good
pretty
one.
good.
And it can
pretty good.
It memes very well.
It memes really well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna pick next week's story. Beth, what are you submitting?
Okay, I have my notes here. Okay, I am submitting the Affluent Engine by N.K. Jemisin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm submitting Mr. Salary by Sally Rooney. I read something recently that says that she is like the great voice of the millennial generation, the first one to emerge. I'm like, okay, let's get this on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, I'll check that out, regardless of who wins this standoff, right?
And what we do is, if yes doesn't get it in, I'll just resubmit it later. But the game, the competitiveness of the game is
right. It's sacrosanct.
I've been waiting this whole time. Yes.
All right. So I have a very cheerful and delightful game to which all of the answers will be either pink, red, green, blue, purple, or black.
Okay.
Very clever. Nice.
I do what I can.
Okay.
So let's start with Beth.
Okay.
Dear Beth, litmus turns what solution or what color when dipped into an acid solution?
I'm going to say pink.
It is pink.
Very nice.
Ding, ding, ding.
Anais?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What? Wait, no. I lost it. There we go. What movie in 1986 had 11 Oscar nominations and won none?
Purple. The color purple?
The color purple.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oscar so white back then.
Yep.
Good gravy.
Mm-hmm.
A magpie's feathers, Beth. A magpie's feathers are colored white and what?
Black or blue? Blue.
Blue? It was black.
Dang.
Anais?
Mm-hmm.
Before he had it painted pink in 1955, what color was Elvis Presley's first Cadillac?
Oh. I didn't even know he had it painted pink. Blue?
It was blue.
All right. Good guess.
Bravo.
I was saving this final one as a tiebreaker. I will give it out anyway.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1983 film Rumblefish, what color were Mickey Rourke's fish in the pet shop he was looking at?
I have no clue. I mean, yeah. Wild guess, yellow?
They were red, blue, and green. I would have taken them. It was a black and white movie. That's what it was fun. But the fish were, it was very nice.
Okay.
Good.
And what we'll be reading next week?
We will be reading Mr. Salary by Sally Rooney. But before you go, tell us what you thought of the bracelet game in our Facebook group, The Literary Roadhouse Readers, or on Twitter at Lit Roadhouse, or our website, literaryroadhouse.com. And the story made us realize that we need to add Celeste Ng novel to our book club. So do you want to read? I'm guessing Little Fires Everywhere is where we should start. Then join us on Literary Roadhouse Book Club, where we will discuss that novel sometime soon. And lastly, this story has inspired me to relive my youth with drugstore Barbie dolls and cheap lipstick. Support my teen regression and our podcast expenses at patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the unobservant drugstore cashier in your life. Until next time, read a good story. Oh, thanks so much, Beth, for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Okay. Woo.